My name is Douglas Koch, Koch is how you spell the last name. And I'm a Korean War vet. I was a U.S. Marine in a rifle company. So I'm not, I wasn't a leader, officer, or anything like that. I was just a rifleman that when they wanted to take a hill, then they says, go, take the hill.
Great. So, could you tell us when you were born and where you were born?
I was born in Sioux City on March 18th, 1930.
Great. And could you talk about your family background at the time?
Okay, I was born to a 16-year-old unwed mother, and she put me up for adoption. And that was in the 30s, and the Depression was on, so she realized right away that she couldn't handle a family. So I was put in an orphanage in Sioux City, and my mom and dad had been married 8 years up in Mitchell, and 8 years and had no children. The doctor that advised this young lady where to go to get a baby taken care of also knew my parents, and he says, you've had 8 years, no children. But I know of a little boy sitting in a orphanage in Sioux City, and I think he would fit into your family very well. And so my mother and dad drove from Mitchell to Sioux City. Now then, in the 30s, that was an all-day trip. They came into the orphanage and looked me over and held me and stuff like that, and drove back to Mitchell and started adoption proceedings. So they were my mom and dad, and they told me immediately that I was adopted. And so, as far as I don't know anything else about my mother other than she was 16 and unwed. And so mom and dad were my family. And they raised me. And then after about a year and a half after they adopted me, they heard about a little boy out in the hospital in Mitchell, and they went and decided to adopt him. Raising one isn't fair, so they raised 2 boys, and we were typical boys. Got into mischief, and they dug holes in the lawn and things like that. And we went through school in Mitchell, and just lived a normal life, played basketball in grade school and football in high school, and ran in track, and moved on to more higher education. To when I was 15, they were looking for men or bodies to fill up the National Guard unit that they was forming after the war, and it was Company B, 196th Infantry. Well, we found out there's about a dozen of us that were juniors in high school, and we found out about that. So we went down, and they didn't ask for any birth certificates. So we told them we were 18, and we joined the National Guard while we were a junior in high school. And then when I got to be a senior, I was kind of footloose, and I wanted travel and adventure. So then I came over to Sioux Falls and joined the Marines.
And what year was this?
That was 1948. And I was 18 then. And so I went into the Marine Corps and 1st of July of 1948 and went to San Diego. Did my boot camp there. And Marine boot camp is a place where they change your attitude in a hurry. It's tough. And then I went out into infantry unit and went to Hawaii. We were supposed to go to China and help Chiang Kai-shek. The communists were pushing him out of China. They came from the north, and we were supposed to keep him alive because they had $1 million bounty on his head, the communists did. Well, we started out helping him, and then the Navy was having a problem with what we called Chinese bandits. They were climbing up anchor chains and taking over a oiler or a ship and throwing the sailors off, and then they would steal everything they could. So this admiral that was in charge of all of the naval forces in that area, and the Marine Corps as part of the Navy, decided that was enough, and he ordered one rifle platoon to come on every ship that was chance of the Chinese communists to try to take over. And so I ended up the next 5 months on the heavy cruiser St. Paul. And we were bunked down in the same compartment as the seagoing Marines. Now a seagoing Marine is he is the officers, the captain's exec, and he's the orderly for the captain and the exec, and he has a spit and polish job. Us infantry guys, our job was to repel boarders, so, we didn't have much to do until they got to a situation where they thought the boarders were coming. And then we went up to sky forward, that's the highest point of the forward part of the ship would be the, I'm trying to think of the, crow's nest. And then our job was then to discourage anybody from trying to take over the heavy cruiser. And we did that a couple times. And then our job was then from 8 in the evening, first squad went on 8 in the evening till midnight, and then the second squad went on at midnight to 4 in the morning, and we walked the decks all the time to make sure that there nobody was trying to come in or come on. And then the third squad came on at 4 in the morning to 8 in the morning, and then after 8 there was no duty for us Marines. We just killed time about then. But we went to a lot of ports in China and saw a lot of things, and got down to Singapore and then down to the Philippines and then back up to China, and we did that for about 5 months. And then they decided the St. Paul went way down to Australia. They didn't need another detachment of Marines, so was sent back to our platoon was sent back to the Camp Pendleton in the States. And so being just a platoon, we were put in what they called a casual company. And at that time, they were making the movie Sansa Iwo Jima with John Wayne in it. And they wanted us guys to be out there just as background. So we spent about a little over a month out there when they were making that picture and met John Wayne and a lot of the actors. And John Wayne was, if you wanted to, you and your buddies wanted a picture with him, come on over, guys. And he didn't, no, he was really a nice guy. And so we had a lot of fun there. And so then they sent us back to the Casual Company because we were done making our movie. And so then I heard that they were going to make a reconnaissance unit, radar reconnaissance unit, and work off a submarine. And go in at night in little boats and reconnoiter an area. And so they wanted volunteers, so they started out with 700 volunteers, and the requirements that they had were pretty strict physically. And when they got all done with their requirements, and they ended up, there was 103 of us left that met all the requirements. So for a Marine being on a submarine is really a different. Not very many Marines can say that. And so I spent the next 9 months, we would go to Hawaii in the middle of the night and land in where these villages were way out in the country, and then go through the village and write down facts about the village and bring it back to the submarine to show what we had done. I did that for 9 months.
And so why were you doing this?
This was training, just training, and we would go to Hawaii and back to San Diego, and we did that 4 times, and then we did a couple of them in northern part of Camp Pendleton, where there were some civilian housing, and we would go in there in the middle of the night, write down street numbers, house numbers, and things like that, and then back out. And we weren't supposed to wake anybody up, but I'm sure they heard dogs barking. But then we'd roll back to the submarine that was anchored about a mile off ashore, and they'd only put one light up so that we knew where they were. They didn't want to be spotted. So I did that for 9 months, and they decided that 103 Marines were too many, so they cut the reconnaissance unit down to 20, and I ended up back in a rifle company, Dog 2-5, right there, and back as a rifleman again, and
Could you say that one more time? Say that part one more time. Say that, point to your shirt, say that one more time, and say what company you were in.
Oh, Dog Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, D25. Were you able to get that?
Yeah, hold on. Now I'm going to zoom back in, and then you can continue talking.
Okay. By then it was spring of 1950, and I happened to be down in San Diego going to a movie on a Saturday night at the end of, let's see, end of July, no. No, end of Well, let's see. When did the Korean War start?
June 25th, 1950.
Help me out.
Yeah, June
Once-
25th.
Okay, I was down there in San Diego going to a movie. I come out of the movie, it was probably 9 o'clock, and there was a little boy selling papers on the corner of San Diego. And he was telling about North Korea invaded South Korea. I headed back for Camp Pendleton, and my buddies, I woke up my one buddy, this was 3 o'clock in the morning then, and Dick Fletcher was his name. And I woke him up and I says, North Koreans invaded South Korea. And oh my gosh, the newspaper here is really full of the information. The South Koreans were not trained to attack or defend against tanks, and their army was, although it was a peacekeeping army, was not trained against trained combat that the North Korean army was. They had been with the communists in China, and the South Korean army just was overwhelmed. And so we talked about it that night, and I said, we thought, we'll be over there pretty soon. And this one buddy was sitting there, and he says, we'll never leave the States. And so then it got to be July 4th, and there was always a big rodeo and a picnic then, and all the scuttlebutt that the Marines, we were going to go, but we hadn't heard anything official about it. So on the 5th of July, the word came down that we were going to go to Korea, and all men that had less than 6 months left on their enlistment were to be moved out of the infantry units, and then all these extra Marines and Guard detachments and along the coast were to be transferred in to form a brigade with just the 5th Marines as the infantry, and the 11th Marines was the artillery. And so there was chaos getting everything packed and back and forth to San Diego to where the landing, the LSTs and the LEDs landing craft ships that carried troops were waiting for us, and they loaded up. And it was the 14th of July that we left San Diego, and the word was that we were to go to Japan and wait for the rest of the division, 1st Marine Division. Well, we got halfway over to Japan, and we noticed that our ship was going a different direction. We were headed straight for Korea. And so we got to Korea itself, Busan, on August 2nd of 1950. And in Busan, there was refugees, there was units from the South Korean Army, and it was just utter chaos. The refugees and just took up as much space. And we unloaded on the 3rd off of ships and onto the trains and headed for the front line. And about the 5th then of August, we were in combat against the North Korean Army. and we had gotten so soft coming across on the ships. Drank a lot of water, didn't do any calisthenics, and so the first week we lost a lot of guys to heat stroke and fatigue and stuff like that. Took about a week to get us into shape where we could do our job like we were supposed to. And I'll have to tell you that we had officers or staff NCOs, and some of our officers were veterans of World War II, and they kept us green kids organized, because when somebody starts shooting at you, your first impulse is to turn and run. Well, we had a platoon sergeant and a gunnery sergeant, and they held us kids to do our duty. We return fire against the enemy, and so we got our baptism of fire that way. It was tough, but we managed to get through. And then, can I stop for a drink of water?
Absolutely.
My voice is getting gruff.
Yeah, and if I look down, it's because I'm looking at my notes, so don't worry about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe you want to ask some questions.
Yeah, I know. You're a great talker, so I haven't, but yeah, so I'll ask questions, don't worry. But you're a great talker. Have you done interviews before?
No.
Wow, you're like a professional. I don't even need to say, because I usually need to say, okay, where did you go next? When? They usually forget when, but you got all the dates down.
Well, I've got a copy of the history of the 1st Brigade, and this tells a history. The month of August of 1950, Korea was almost wiped off.
Okay, wait, sorry, 1 second. So this is all your experience, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
Because
go back.
they had the army had come over from Japan. They set up a defense line along the Nakdong River, and they were trying to hold the North Korean army from pushing everybody off what they call the Pusan perimeter. And you probably heard about that. And so then we were a smaller unit, and so our job was, in the month of August, was where the North Koreans would punch a hole in the Army's lines, and then we were to go up there and push them back across the Nakdong River. And in the month of August, we participated in 3 major operations. And when you're on the offense like that, though, you take a lot more casualties than you do on defense. So, but we did our job and through the month of August, and took our losses, but we did our job. And Nakdong River got to be quite a interesting place, because where the Army 2 divisions would meet, that is the weakest spot in a defense line, where the 2 divisions are, because a lot of times they don't have coordination to back each other up. So that's where the North Koreans would come through. And we met them then maybe 5 miles into South Korean territory. Then we would push them back across the river. And we did that 3 times in the month of August. And the reason that I speculate on that, the graves registration that picked our dead casualties up, their orders were to only bury the bodies 2 feet deep because they were afraid we were going to have to pull out and go to Japan. And they didn't want to leave any American bodies there. And a lot of the Army units were already packing up to go back to Japan. But our officer says, we're going to not go back, we're going to stay here and fight. That's what we're supposed to do. And we did for the whole month of August into the first couple days of September. Then we were taken off the line and down to Busan and aboard ship. We all knew then, scuttlebutt was, we were going to make an amphib landing. But nobody knew anything of where it was. And so we were aboard ship and out to sea 3 days. And finally we found out that this was already the 10th of September. We were going to make this landing on the 15th of September. And we had no idea what the landing was going to be like. And then we got the word the 5th Marines was going to land in the city of Incheon, in the city of 500,000 people, over the seawall that protected the city, and that way we could go in fast and we could cut out all the railroads, because all the railroads in North and South Korea came into Seoul. And MacArthur's idea was, if we could get a unit in there, cut the rail lines, that would cut off the North Koreans' supplies that they had down in South Korea where they were fighting around the Busan perimeter. So our regiment drew the short straw. We had to land in the city, and over a seawall we climbed up wooden ladders out of the landing craft and got into the city. And the North Koreans thought nobody would be crazy enough to land in a city of 500,000 people over a seawall with a 30-foot tide up and down. So they had to have H-hour instead of 6 o'clock in the morning like World War II was. We landed at 5:30 in the afternoon. And so we had 2 hours of daylight to secure our part of the town that night. And then the next day we started marching to Seoul. And I've talked to people who grandparents lived in Seoul, and they said they were in the city, and when they heard that the Marines had landed at Incheon and were headed for Seoul, even though there was a full North Korean division there, and their commanding officer says, we're not going to give the city over to the Marines. The Korean civilians that lived in the city, and some of them had been in the Japanese army, drafted into the Japanese army in World War II. So they knew if the Marines said they were going to take the city, all those civilians who could headed for the hills northeast of Seoul, and they set up on the hills and watched the taking of Seoul back from the communists. And I've apologized to South Koreans that I've met when we were back there in 1985 for as much damage as we did to Seoul. We burned, almost all the wooden buildings were burned down. And the only buildings that were left standing were the temples that were made out of stone. But we took the city, and the other two regiments of the 1st Marine Division, the 1st Regiment and the 7th Regiment, finished cleaning up Seoul. The 5th Marines were just decimated as far as numbers went. And that's where my luck ran out. I was a squad leader then, and our platoon sergeant says, you take your squad, go across that rice paddy over on the other side and set up a fire base. And so then the rest of the company can come across. Well, I looked at my squad and I had almost all replacements. What I should have done was send one of the men in my squad across to where we were going. Instead, I said, follow me. And that was by mistake. I got halfway across the rice paddy, and a North Korean machine gunner put 4 rounds of bullets in this thigh and this hip. And my squad was behind me, and they stopped and wanted to help me. And I says, get by me. 2 men make a better target than one. The corpsman will be along and pick me up in a little while. So get across there. You know what you're supposed to do. So they did. They left me out in the middle of the rice paddy. And I laid there, and I then tried to get out of my backpack and stuff like that. And I was moving around a little bit. And an hour later, a sniper put a bullet in my right side. And then I realized I was in a predicament. I was up the well-known estuary with no means of locomotion. Out in the open, that I knew a corpsman wasn't going to get out there. So I played like I was dead. And I laid there a total of 7 hours before help could get out to me. And it happened to be a corpsman that I knew. His name was Downs. And I said, Doc, Downs, give me a shot of morphine and forget the bandages. And he did. He gave me a full ampule of morphine. And in just a few minutes, I was just floating along. And so then my...
Wait, actually, I'm going to ask you.
Oh, okay.
So you're in Korea, you have wounds on both sides, and you're alone for 7 hours, and you're in this place, and you mentioned that you had read about Korea in the newspaper, but did you know about Korea before?
No, not till we got there. I didn't hardly know anything about Korea.
So you're in this place that you don't know anything about, and you're just wounded on all sides. So what were you thinking?
Well, before the corpsman got to me, the pain in the hip and the leg and the side got real bad. And when the sniper shot me in this side, that rolled me over on my stomach. So I knew I was in trouble. So I laid there as quiet as I could. The pain got really bad, and I will admit, I prayed, and I cried a little bit because of the pain, and then finally I just says, I'm going to lay here. If I get shot again, maybe I'll be done then. But after, and I had my pocket watch is in my pocket, so I could tell what time it was. And that's why I knew it was 7 hours before Dr. Downs got out to me, the corpsman. And so after he shot me full of morphine, my buddies then came running out with a stretcher, and 4 of them put me on this stretcher, and we were going down the side of the hill, and they dropped me. And I rolled down to the bottom of the hill. Of course, I wasn't feeling any pain, and I didn't realize when the guys got down to me, this ankle, or this foot, was twisted off to the side. So my buddy says, oh, Koch's foot's crooked. Let's straighten it up. So they did. I laugh about it now. But then they carried me back down. I was loaded down in an ambulance, and at 9 o'clock that night, I got back to Kimbu Airfield, where they had a division hospital set up. And from there on, it was from back to Japan, and then back to the States, and I ended up in Mare Island Naval Hospital, which is way up in the north part of San Francisco.
And when was this?
Huh?
When was this?
It was the first part of September,
What year?
1950. They took one look at me, and they said, you're going to be a long-term patient. So we're going to put you in a cast from here down on both legs. Took 4 guys to carry my stretcher. And I have to tell you this kind of funny story. They loaded us on these planes, and they were old propeller-driven planes, so they had to stop and refuel at Midway. And I was laying there, and for almost 7 weeks, I'd been out in the rice paddies, and in those days they had a different way of fertilizing their rice paddies. And here come this Air Force nurse along, reading name tags and telling guys what they had to do if they had to ditch the plane. And she came along, and she had perfume. Oh my God, about knocked my hat off. All I'd smelled for 7 weeks was rice paddy. And here this beautiful young lady had perfume. And so she read my tag, and she looked at me and she says, I hate to tell you this, Marine. She says, if this plane goes down, you're going down with it, because there's no way we can get you off before the plane would go. That's not too encouraging. But anyhow, got to Hawaii, then got to Mare Island, California, the hospital there, and then involved numerous operations, and in a traction bed. I was flat on my back, staring at the ceiling for 5 months while they operated it, and they saved both legs and my side, but I've still got infection in the legs, and I drain ever so often. But I'm 86 years old, and here I am talking to an attractive young lady in Sioux Falls.
Oh, great.
Now, it's your turn.
Okay, so where did you, after your surgeries and your treatment, where did you go?
Well, I stayed in Mare Island till the next spring, May of '51, and then they sent me to Great Lakes, which made it closer to home. Then I was able to come home on a sick leave for 30 days. And so they kept doing treatments on me when I came back. And then they sent me to trial duty down at Hastings, Nebraska, had a naval ammunition dump. And it was really soft duty. But this leg ended up being shorter than this leg. So when I marched with a platoon or a squad, it looked like I was out of step because I would bounce. So they sent me back to Great Lakes, and they tried different ideas, but finally I was up in the front of adjudication board, and they said there's nothing more we can do, and so you're a corporal, and rather than give you a discharge, we're going to medically retire you. That means you will be eligible for all of the benefits that a retired officer or a retired NCO would have. So there at the ripe old age of 22, I was medically retired and went back to Mitchell, found a job in the post office, and this young lady that was in nurses training I'd been writing to for a while, we decided to get married. So we got married, and I was looking for a rich widow, but I married a fertile nurse, and we had 8 kids. And we have 8 kids.
Wonderful. So did you say you went back in 85? Or did I miss?
We went back to Korea in 1985.
Just with your family?
With my wife. Just took her, and there was about 300 other Marines and their wives on this trip. And it was in the middle of September. So it was an anniversary of our landing at Incheon. And we were, had a banquet every night for a week, you know. And I told my wife, though, I says, be careful what you pick up when you go along this tray table, because you may not know what you're going to get. And so she was careful what, you know, some of the dishes that are pretty spicy. And, but she got trained pretty well. Well, most of the rest of the guys, after a week, went back to the States. We had talked to our travel agent here, and so we continued on. We went into communist China, down to Hong Kong, over to Okinawa, down to Singapore, and all around the Philippines. We were traveling for almost 5 weeks then, altogether. And my wife, I took her places where I'd been when I was just a kid, and showed her different. We went to Buddhist. We had a Buddhist that was with us, and he took us into one of their prayer services, their church services, and things like that. So we had a pretty good experience. People were so gracious to us. So.
How was it like being back in Korea in 85 after you had gone through so much hardship?
Well, the people of Korea were so gracious to us. We had our name tags and the 1st Division emblem on there, and people would meet us on the streets of Seoul, and they would come up and shake our hands and thank us for the service that we had. And it was so, they were so gracious.
So do you have any, you seem to speak about Korea in a very happy and a positive way, but do you have any, memories that stick with you that of danger? Obviously, you told me about when you were wounded, but is Korea generally a positive memory for you or negative?
Our return in '85 was all positive. They were so, like I said, so nice to us, and some of the younger people, which I mean your age, college age, would like to have the United States out of there, but they would go out on the streets where this one college was, and it's run by the Catholic priests, this college, and the students would go out on the street and have a demonstration. Well, then the police would come and chase them back on the campus. Then the police would not go on the campus. They'd throw I'm trying to think.
Grenade?
Well, a gas.
Yeah. Gas bombs?
Gas, yeah. And so we were standing there talking to this priest, and it was raining, and the rain was bringing the tear gas down on our eyes, and we started crying. And he says, "Oh, come on, we'll get out in the street and away from the forage over our heads." And he says, "Sometimes I wish we could send these unhappy students to 100 miles north for a couple months, and then we would think they would have a different attitude when they came back." And I says, later, my one friend was a Catholic. I says, "That's not a very Christian thing that priest thinking about." But he says, "I imagine they get tired of those kids just making a fuss."
How does that make you feel that at that time there were college students who wanted the U.S. out when your service was the reason why, there was a South Korea to speak of?
Well, they were like kids. We had kids, and we just let them put on a demonstration, and we didn't want to bother them, but guys that have been stationed there said that sometimes it kind of grates your patience. But I was so amazed at what Seoul was like after what we seen, the worst of it, nothing but ashes and burned down and stuff, and they've rebuilt their streets are 6-lane highways, and cars all over the place, tall buildings, and just they what they've done to their country after we practically destroyed everything that we fighting through it. We weren't that careful sometimes, but it was amazing to us. And we flew Korean Air, and both ways, and talk about service. Those waitress or hostesses on Korean Air are so gracious and precious. And they come mealtime, they would dress up in their native costume in service. It was just wonderful to make that trip.
Yeah, definitely.
And I would hoped to go back again before, but my wife's health is failing, and so we're not going to be able to make that trip again.
So, you were, as you said, very young when you were in Korea.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you gave up your best days to go fight in a country that you didn't know about?
We always kidded each other that you volunteered, you know, you signed. Nobody made you sign on the bottom line, and you see this a lot of times out to the hospital, in the VA hospital there, that sometime in your life you filled out a check made out to the U.S. government for all of your belongings plus your life, if you have to, and then you signed your name, and that's a display at different places out to the hospital. So that's the way, you know, guys would complain, but we would say, hey, you volunteered.